Welcome to the show, everyone. My guest today is Sherrie Clark. So Sherrie and I got connected in a very unique way. I'll save the story for when you actually listen to the interview, but it was one of those moments where, maybe in the past I might have ignored the introduction of how Sherrie and I got connected. But knowing how I've shifted and evolved here over the last 6 months, I've left myself open to possibilities and things that are just divinely meant to happen. And the conversation with Sherrie today, we talked about that and we referenced the first conversation that we had. And yeah, it was just another magical chat where it was another person that I'm glad that I brought into my life, that I've attracted into my life. And the focus of the conversation was really around storytelling and the stories that we all have to tell and how they can actually be very healing to tell those stories, but then also very insightful and helpful for other people on their journey. And Sherrie's focus as it relates to her work is in supporting people to write their story, to share their story, to publish a book, to market a book, to get that out into the world. And we dove deep on that because, my questions around it were really from a curiosity standpoint, from my own perspective, because I've yet to write a book. I aspire to write a book, but I haven't made the time to write a book. I haven't put it on the top of my priority list. And so I just questioned some of the things that come into my mind, like why a book? Why would I do a book over something else? What is the impact of a book? Should I do a physically printed book or should it just be a digital version of a book? Should I do it all on my own? Are there ways to get people to help me with this, not only with the ideas and the structuring and the editing, but also the publishing and the distribution and the launch aspect of it? And wait a second, what happens if I've got this idea for a book, but I feel like it's never, ever done? Can I still launch that book and then come back to it later? There was all of these questions that I had that I'm sure if you are somebody that wants to create impact in this world, you might have thought about writing a book at some point too, and you maybe have the same questions that I had for Sherrie. So I think you're going to really enjoy this conversation. Sherrie has such a light and fun energy to her and a very grounded purpose in really wanting to be of service to people and make this world a better place through the books that she writes and through the people that she serves to write their books. So let's go ahead and give this one a listen. Okay, Sherrie Clark, it's so nice to see you again. I know we've only chatted once, but I thoroughly enjoyed that conversation and I can't wait to have another one with you and introduce you to my network. So welcome to my show.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And yes, I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation before, so I'm really eager to finish it or continue with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we got introduced just in a kind of a random way, but on purpose and intentional. I know that for your work, you support people in authoring books and sharing their story with the world. And naturally, that puts you into the world of sharing your story and connecting with other people that have platforms and voices. And I know you ended up on a page to book a podcast interview. And I was like, where did that come from? Because it wasn't a public page, actually.
I know.
It's so funny. But you know what? I'll tell you, in the last 6 months or so, I think I mentioned this to you on our last call, I'm really just trusting that whatever magically shows up in my world is there on purpose. So I better pay attention to it. And that's been a big shift for me in the last 6 months, where I might have just ignored it and thought, how did this happen? Now I thought, no, you know what? I will take that call. And like I say, it was such a great chat. And I really enjoyed learning about you and your background and what you're doing in service for others. And anyways, it's just a little background into how we got connected. Is kind of ironic, but on purpose. And I'll say one other thing here too, and then I want you to introduce yourself to everybody here. There's a bit of a theme here on this podcast, which is vulnerable, honest, truthful stories of what brought you to this place right now. The messy, ugly truth, as they say. And Brene Brown has a quote where she says, one day you will tell your story of how you overcame what you went through, and it will be somebody else's survival guide. So it's just a good grounding for us to kind of kick off the conversation. So I'd love to allow you to introduce yourself. So tell us who you are. Where are you? What brought you to this place? And what really drives you? What are you passionate about?
Well, wow, that's a lot, but I love talking about it. And again, thank you so much for having me here. This wasn't anything I had ever set out to do, but you talk about the story, and I love the story. That's my thing, is helping people with their story. I was a police officer with the NYPD, and they say that cops can tell the best story. Cops know how to tell the best story. So, you learn without knowing, you learn the storytelling elements and how to tell a story. And of course, in a story, I think to be one ingredient to be a good storyteller is passion. Like, you got to have that passion involved in there. So, when I left the NYPD, time, went on, and I ended up starting a nonprofit for domestic violence victims. And I started doing copywriting and content writing, and I love doing it. I've always loved writing. And so I'm doing that. And a friend says to me, she says, hey, she says, why don't you take these classes at this college? They're offering all these write a book class. So I thought, well, why not? Always up for a challenge. So I did, and I got into it. Like, I really got into it. And so I took every class they had. Every class they had on writing, I took. I was getting books. I was researching. I was going to write the next great American novel, Trevor. That was my goal.
Yeah.
But in the midst of that, I became a foster parent. And I saw what happened going through the foster care system, and it was appalling. It was eye-opening, and my heart was for the children. And I didn't know how do I fight back on this? How do I expose this? Well, hello, writer. I'm a writer. So I wrote a book, Small Voices Silenced. So I'm writing that. Yeah, I'm writing that. And I'm doing content writing, copywriting. One of my clients comes to me and goes, hey, I've got a client just wrote a book. Would you edit it? I thought, well, why not? Of course I will. So I did her book, and I just kind of found my groove, and so my book got published, and surprisingly, I was just really kind of trying to expose something and sharing a mother's heart, and it won some awards, and so it's kind of gave me that credibility factor, like, oh, she can write a book, so now people come to me, and so I'm editing it, but now they're like, well, we've got this book, how do we get it published? Mm-hmm. I'm like, well, that's
all
a good,
the pieces,
good question. Yeah. And I learned something from my experience. So I started doing that. And then I'm like, I want to write a book, but I don't know how to write it. Well, I'll write it for you. And yeah. And then, oh, well, we can't sell any books. Well, let me go figure that out. So I started studying all the marketers and how they did that. And I came up with my little version of an Amazon bestseller program. And it's worked. Every time it's worked. And I tried it out on mine first. I don't ever try something out on a client or an author in case, there's like glitches in there. And it worked. So we started doing that. So it's like, well, I need to make this official. Now, all this time, I'm like this freelancer. So I, made it official, started Storehouse Media Group, and we ended up becoming an award-winning publisher. And we went along the way. But, starting in entrepreneurship, that's like the short version. I'm a writer, I'll tell you like a lot. Ask me a question. But the short version was it was a tough road. There was a point when we were actually in the beginning phases as I'm working, we didn't have a home. We became homeless. My husband at the time didn't have a home, and, but by the grace of God, he kept a roof over our head. So we, didn't have to sleep in a car, but, it was a scary time, but it made me more determined, like this was never going to happen again. And so that's when I really started pushing myself into, becoming the best that I could be out there and working and helping people tell the stories. And so my big thing is about the story. I love the stories. I would say I have the best job in the world because I get to read people's stories all the time, and I get to work on them, and I get to craft them and make them improve them. But the storytelling is huge. It's absolutely huge because I'll sit there and I'll tell you all these things about the domestic violence or human trafficking, and you're like, well, that's interesting, but you may not remember stuff. But if I tell you through a story, and I weave that in with the story, you're going to remember what I tell you. You're going to walk out that door and like, wow, I had no idea. Like, wow, that's a problem. Like, I didn't know that. And so that's how I used to write when I used to do the content writing was through story, because I wanted people to understand the plight of what someone was going through. And it's always, to me, it was giving the underdog, the victim, a voice. And I would do it through a story to have people understand what they've gone through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's you have such a diverse background. I'm so glad that you shared all of that stuff of being a New York City police officer and all of the path that brought you to this place. And there's a couple of things that came up for me. One was just the power of story, especially in the world that we live in right now. There's almost a feeling of, I want to say, helplessness by people at times, where you just look at everything and you think, my Lord, how do we create change here? And so that when you dive into that, you think, well, maybe it's the policy, maybe it's the politics, maybe it's just me and how I show up in my community. Maybe I should actually share my story with the intent on it actually touching somebody's heart to then shift the way that they show up in the world. Like that's the one where I was like, oh, that it just landed for me as well. In you saying that out loud. And then the other thing is just, in speaking about your journey, it sounds like it was fairly fluid and seamless of like, of course I'll share this story, but what do you find in working with other people that maybe makes them hesitate to even do that? Because I know there's a lot of people that have stories to tell, but they're stuck here right now. What have you found? And have you always been that person that's just like, of course I'm going to tell this story? Or have you ran into that resistance as well?
Yeah, you're right. Everybody has a story. Everybody's unique. You may have similar stories, but you're still going to have a unique story. So, like, never underestimate the power of your story. That's the first thing. And, what I find with a resistance is the vulnerability. And it's the vulnerability that's going to bond your readers to you, or if you're, whatever book you're writing, the characters. And I use the example of Peter Parker and Spider-Man, the older times. I haven't watched them lately. Yeah, that everybody loves Spider-Man because he's really cool.
My kids love Spider-Man.
He is a cool dude. He's got those things where the wipes come out right on demand. So, who wouldn't want to be Spider-Man? But it was Peter Parker that they bonded with, they connected with, because he had the flaws. So when you're vulnerable, I remember, oh my goodness, years ago, I was taking a class and, I can't even remember the guy. He was a well-known guy. And he said, you have to be willing to fillet yourself open and show the vulnerabilities of yourself and with people so that they'll be able to connect. And when I'm working with authors on a book, and I'll say the most connective force I believe you're going to have is with the characters. Because if your readers get into that character's mind and you can put them in those characters' shoes where they feel like they're going through it together, they're bonded to that character. They can't wait to see what the character and the reader do next. And you've got them. I mean, you've got them hooked, and they're going to go with you. They've got to know you. They've got to like you, and they trust you now. And they're going to go with you. So to me, characters are extremely important in a story because they're the ones who are involved. But it's the vulnerability, and a lot of people don't want to show that. So many times I'm with an author and I'm like, well, I need to know, like, what were you thinking? Like, what was going through your head? Like, I need to show this. And it's like trying to push a donkey up a hill there, and now they just bellow back like, that's enough. And I'm like, no, it's not. I mean, readers are going to have questions, they're like, what? But, so, when I get these authors, like there's some authors are like, oh yeah, this was happening. I was thinking that, good, bad, or indifferent. They tell me. And when I work with them, I'm not going to do anything that's going to make them look bad or destructive or anything like that. I'm very careful and intentional with what I put in there. But showing that vulnerable side is important in a story.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very interesting how in the same context of how we started this conversation now, I said, hey, you popped into my world and here we are having this conversation, and I'm trusting that every conversation is intentional. And I just published an episode today, actually, with somebody that I met on a LinkedIn post of all places. She had posted just a vulnerable share, a picture of her with her belly exposed, pregnant, with her husband's arms around her. And she talked about how 7 years ago she lost her daughter to stillbirth at like 38 weeks, I want to say. So it was very, very far along. And I have had a similar experience, and my wife and I actually lost 2 kids, but one of them a daughter as well around the same time. So I just jumped in on the comments on her post, and 3 days later we were on a call, and 4 days later we were doing a podcast interview, and today it actually published. But the story side of that, one of the things that just resonated with me was by me actually sharing that out loud, there was a fear, naturally. There was a relief as well of just saying something out loud of like, yes, I've experienced this. But then also it actually has allowed me to unpack the meaning behind it and what it's created for purpose for me too. And for me, it was, I looked at that time and thought, how could this possibly have happened to me? And then thought, did I create this? Was I actually play a hand in all of this? And I've done a lot of deep work to really reconcile on that. But I really have come to the thought that, yeah, I believe I did have a hand in creating that. And then it gets me thinking, man, am I powerful? I can create anything, even the most painful things in my life. So imagine if I just embraced that and thought, you are the conscious creator of everything in your life. And like I say, that never even crossed my mind. It's been 7 years. And now all of a sudden, just within the last week, I'm like, oh, there's the story. That's the thing that is this incredible pain that now can become an inspiration for others and something that I can actually even attach to. So I guess I just wanted to say that out loud. But the other thing is knowing my own experience, I didn't see it until I just started having conversations and I allowed other people to reflect back on me. Like, can you see what this did to actually create that? Do you experience that too in working with clients where maybe they don't even understand the power of their experiences and their stories? They just see them as like, oh yeah, that was a really dark time and I don't want to go there. But you actually look at it and go, oh, no, that's the thing. That's it. Have you experienced that before?
All the time.
Yeah,
I
sure.
have people coming to me and they want to write a business book. And these are people who have, they're successful. They've had a really good career. And, like you can just look at the person like, wow, they maybe got, they were handed this or whatever. These people, they had to claw their way up to the top. And when we start working on that and I start catching these powerful stories, it's like with you, and you were talking about someone we chatted a couple weeks ago, you connected with someone's vulnerability because you had that vulnerability too. And that was a shared experience that you two had in some way that no one will be able to come in and say, well, let me explain this to you, or let me show you this. Like, that's an experience that no one could take away from either of you. And you bonded through that grief and that pain and that tragedy. And then this other woman you were talking about vulnerability, like you both connected with that vulnerability. And so that is the power of storytelling. Even if it's getting on a post and sharing that vulnerability, people, they get that. They don't want to see perfection. They don't want to see how you're winning all the time. They don't want to see how great you are all the time. You've done this and you've done that. Like, they want to see, like, you've had some tough times, and you can even say that maybe there was a failure, which I never like to call it failure. I always call it a lesson learned. Like, take that and learn and build to the next level. Because it's like, us meeting was, I believe also that things happen. And I think also with that, with things that happen, unique tragedy, a grief and whatever, I think at that time, like you were talking about the author earlier, you take that, sometimes you have to simmer it, you have to process it, but when you speak it, that's when it becomes freeing. And these authors that start off with this business book, they want to do a business book, and then they realize, I have a story to tell. I'm going to teach them through my story. And that's how we do it. And I've had authors like, oh, well, we'll do some questions at the end of each chapter. And they'll have people, do like a beta read. And they're like, no, keep going with that story. We don't care about these questions. We don't care. We're learning. Just keep going with that story. We're like in that story and we're in that moment. So to me, that's what ends up happening is these people, they don't want to be vulnerable. They become vulnerable and then they heal. A lot of people will heal through telling their story. And like you were saying, you're going to be the purpose, the inspiration, because there's no one that can understand what that person's gone through but you. You can, no other people. I, wouldn't be able to and other people, but you can. And they're going to come to you and sit at your feet, like, tell me what you learned. Help me get through this grief. It's so painful. I can't take it. Give me some of your wisdom. What did you do to get to the other side? And that's the power of story.
Yeah. The other thing that comes to mind here too is in this world that we live in now, there's so many modalities to share your story. There's this, we could do a podcast. You could write a post and put it up on social. Naturally, just the healing process of journaling and writing out things can be healing for yourself, even if you never share it with the world. But my question to you here then too is why books? Because, and I'll give you some context on this, when people, because I'm a big advocate for the podcast now because I'm experiencing it of like diving in and meeting people like you and having conversations like this. And I say to myself, like, I don't want to do anything else. This is all I want to do is just have like insightful, inspiring conversations. But you hear people say, well, yeah, I do it. But like, podcasting's kind of saturated now. Everybody's doing a podcast. And you could say the same for books. It's like, well, somebody's probably written the book on that thing. So who am I to do that? So why books? Do you have like, I'm sure you've got something that's really grounded as to like, this is why books. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Oh, well, thanks for asking. I love podcasts too. Just so you know, I'm a proponent of podcasting. But here's the secret. I tell authors that if you want to make your book more credible, do a podcast. Whether it's going on a lot of podcasts or hosting a podcast, your book that podcast is going to make that book more credible. On the other hand, if you're doing podcasts, your book is going to make that podcast more credible. So they work really good hand in hand. But books are very powerful. That is... even audiobooks. Audiobooks is one of those things that is so underserved. Like people love listening. Audiobooks is really, as far as books are concerned, magazines, anything that's readable or a written word, it's the only format that you can multitask. You can clean house. You can listen to them when you're driving to work, washing your car. You can listen to an audiobook. But books are different. Like you and I are having a podcast interview, a talk. We're having a conversation. You can't get that in a book. A book is going to tell the complete story. I can give you snippets. I can give you a Cliff Note version. But if you really want to get into the story or the how-to, the book is the place to do it. And you can refer to a book over and over again as well. You can, flip to pages and stuff. But it's a hugely, I was doing something the other day. I was coming up with statistics for something. It's like, in the billions. It's still going. Books are still growing and they're still like very much in demand. Even more so, I was looking at something on statistic.com where they were even showing it as, a few percentage points increase in different age groups of books like reading now than a few years ago. Like there's still an increase. So books are still awesomely powerful, but so are podcasts. Books are going to get a more in-depth perspective than a podcast.
No, it's a great point. They do all kind of tie together. And now I just realized, I believe I actually connected you with Christine. Have you had a chance to talk with her yet? Oh, you did? Okay, good. Yeah, so
Well, no, we are scheduled.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to it very much. She sounds like such a wonderful person. She sounds like fun.
She is a lot of fun. And it speaks to what you were just saying, which is just the synergy of a book and creating your own podcast and getting on other podcasts. It's all really just with the intent on sharing a story, inspiring, connecting, all of that stuff. And with books, like, it was a bit of a planted question. I'm glad you answered it the way that you did, because I've actually found that in the last little bit, as with podcasts, with books, it's almost like people are craving the physical aspect of a hard copy book to just hold on to. Like, I've got a whole rack of them right here. These could very easily be Audibles. Like, they're all available on audible.com, but I just kind of like having that thing in my hand. And let's maybe speak to the evolution of that too, and where you see it right now and where maybe it's going on the publishing side of things. Because, back in the day, before the Amazons of the world existed, you needed a publisher. Like, it was very difficult to like write your book and get it printed and get it distributed and all of that stuff. And then obviously Amazon changed that world. And now we're at this point where we just had such an interesting conversation last time. I'd like you to speak about the evolution of the publishing side of things, and where do you see it going, and where do you see the opportunities and maybe some of the challenges too with that space?
I think publishing is going to continue growing. I mean, even, through a lot of adversities and stuff, people still publish. And it's really a matter of, there's a difference between somebody needing to write a book and someone wanting to write a book. Obviously, there's a whole different motivational level and determination level. And these stories and these messages that authors put out, they're super powerful. I mean, I'll read them, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's like the most powerful book. But then I read them, oh my gosh, it's like these people, I get why they want to get a book out there, because it's super, super powerful. So with that said, people are always going to want to refer to book. If you think about holding a book, that's going to continue, because there's people like you, there's people like me, there's people like my assistant. I mean, you want to hold it, smell it, that whole sensory thing with a book in your hands, doing what I do a lot online. So I guess you could say I have a lot of ebooks, but I work with them on that. But I still have my hard copies, my paperbacks. I still have whole shelves full of books that I like to refer to. And sometimes I'll be working on a project. I'm like, oh, I'm going to go check that out. And I'll go look, and I'll go to my bookshelf, and I'm like, that's the book. And I'll pull it out. And so it's always going to be there. Ebooks are going to be there. Audiobooks, I'm thinking they are going to grow more, because as podcasts grow, people do like that audio aspect. And it's a great way to get a book. And my daughter, she's 14, she's blind. So she doesn't read so much as she does what's called a book port. And so she downloads these, it looks like a little Walkman or something, and it downloads books, and she sits there, and that's what she does. That's how she'll read the books, is through these book ports, which is really basic. It's an audio book. And she loves getting books that way, and that's how she, consumes the books, is through these audio ports. So I think that, more people are going to catch on to the audio books. More people are going to want to do audio books, but there's still going to be the paperback, and there's still going to be the hardcover. And it is anticipated, statistically speaking, to grow a lot more. I think I read it through 2025. I don't have the statistics with me. I'd share them, but it is, I got a lot of stuff off statistic.com, and I went to a lot of other places to get it.
Yeah.
People want to look it up.
Yeah, for sure. I'll definitely link up all of that stuff, and the reason I bring it up is just, in my work, I've worked with a lot of coaches, consultants, speakers, topic experts, that type of thing. And there's a lot of them out there. There's a lot of people that look and sound the same, that have the same certificates, that are trying to figure out how to stand out. And there's a handful of ways. And I believe that this is one of the best ways to do that. And then naturally, the next question then becomes too, and I think it can be a yes and a no answer, but can you actually make money off of a book, or should a book be looked at more as a complementary piece that helps tell the story and connect you with an audience so that you can have a business outside of that a foundational piece of it is the book? what's been your experience in working with clients? Have they done the book with the intent on like, I want to make a bunch of money selling this book? Or is it more, no, this is just like a passion foundational piece of me to be able to attract the people that I want into my world for all the other things that I do to be of service to other people? What's been that balance in you working with clients?
You know, interesting enough, I don't get a whole lot of clients that'll say, I'm writing this book so I can make a lot of money. Because then we'll have to have a talk.
Yeah.
And I will let them know the truth of the matter. Like, you know, you may not get the ROI on your book sales, but I'll tell you what a book will do for you. The book's going to increase your credibility. It's going to establish immediate authority. It's going to put you as the go-to expert. And it's going to open doors of opportunity. Oh, wow, you're an author? Okay, we want you to speak here. You know, you're an expert.
For sure.
People are looked at, people are looked at as the expert when they write a book, and they should be, because if done correctly, they put a lot of work into that. And another thing I say is don't write what you know, write what you're passionate about. That's what's going to sell. That's what's going to connect with your audience. And that's what's going to motivate you to do any kind of research or, you know, go out of your way and go over beyond to make that book. Because when it's a passion, you want to represent that. You want to convey that passion in the best way possible. That's just the way we are as people who have passions. And, you know, we want to get that out there. So, you know, that is a really good, you know, way to yes, it's a very powerful way to get out there is that book and, writing the passion and getting what you know out there. You know, passions first and then get what you know, because you can write a book about passion, but make sure you get the facts straight. If you're writing a book about, let's say, flying a plane, you're going to get pilots who are interested. So you better have your facts straight.
Yeah,
I mean,
there needs to be
better
credibility.
be researched. Yeah, like you can't just say, man, I just wanted to fly a plane, so I wrote a book about it. I mean, you know, get some, you know, credibility in there, and that's going to require research and all that. I'm not quite sure I answered your whole question, so you may want to remind me of that.
No, you did, and it brought up something else too, where I was thinking, you know, in the business world, we use the terminology of like strategy before structure. You know, don't start implementing on all the tactics until you understand the strategy of what you're trying to do and where you want to get to. And in what we're saying here, we're almost saying, yes, but start with why before strategy and then get into those things. So I think that's an important thing for people to hear is if your goal of writing a book is tied into a strategy of a marketing campaign that's going to generate X, Y, that's when it kind of loses its validity and its authenticity almost, right? So, and I just say that out loud so that people can hear that and understand. Like when I work with clients, we start with why, step one. And if we can't get the vision and starting with why and what does that perfect life and day look like for you a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and then what is the story that's brought you to here? I think of the hero's journey, Finding Joe documentary, you know, I'm sure that's a piece of, I'm sure you're familiar with it. And it's a piece of how you extract these stories out of people too. But if you don't start with those things, your strategy doesn't mean anything. Like you can tactic your way into burnout very quickly. And
you can. I'm 100% like you have to understand why you're doing something, because, you know, writing a book is an endeavor. And it's not like, you know, I'm going skating tomorrow night. I mean, this is an endeavor. It's an investment. And a lot of times it's your story. So like you want to invest that story into people's lives. So you want to make sure that it's done correctly. Your name's going to be on the front of that book forever and ever and ever. Amen. Right?
Yeah.
And so you want to make sure that it's done correctly. But there are times when you're an author and you're writing a book, sometimes it can get, you know, people get for whatever reason, maybe it's a time issue or they got stuck on something or frustrating. But that's what I tell people, like write on tons of all these Post-it notes everywhere. Why are you doing this? Kind of like, you know, you heard the old adage, like, okay, I want to lose weight before I go on this cruise ship. And so you put that picture of the bikini or the swimsuit you want to buy in that cruise ship on your refrigerator door. So exactly. So when you go to get that midnight cheesecake slice, oh gosh, that's what I'm reaching for. I can't do that. It's the same thing when you feel like, this is crazy. We're here. We can answer your questions. But if you're trying to go it alone, there should be a system. You need to have that why. And that why it helps you just spell out the rest of it. And if you don't have that strategy, then you have a tendency to get distracted and go on rabbit trails and like, I can't finish my book. And so I totally agree. The why is it, and then the strategy.
Yeah, you just brought up another thing for me. I love the way that these conversations just kind of flow so that we can dig this stuff deep. But the other thing that you just said there was this idea of your name's going on this thing. This is getting printed. It's in the world for eternity. That scares the crap out of people sometimes because they're like, oh my Lord. So I have to pick a point where this is the book and that's it. And I'd love to get your take on that and whether or not you've revisited books with your clients and did updated versions and stuff. Because I think of like the E-Myth, for example, Michael Gerber. He's got the E-Myth revisited, and I think a new version of it comes out like every 3 years or something. So the point is yes, of course, it's kind of like it's locked in time, but it'll evolve. Maybe you create a revisited version. Maybe you adapt it into a whole new book. What's been your experience with that? Have you worked with a lot of clients that maybe get stuck on that or yeah, how do they? You've done it? Yeah.
I've done it. I have, Small Voices Silenced. I published it, I think it was 2012, but I redid it. And I did it's called second editions or third editions or fourth editions. Go. It's okay. And so I redid it and then I put it out again five or 6 years later. And so, yes, and people will do that and we'll go back and they have changes to make. So it's like, okay, here's the second edition. And here's the good part about that is that you get to do another book launch and you get to put it out there like brand new, like, hey, I've got this book. Sometimes it's a situation of maybe changing something, a cover or a title that they've gotten and they'll come and like, oh, I don't like this. So we'll redo the cover, we'll redo the title. That can make a difference as well. So second edition, third editions, all of that are important. But I say that your name is on that book and it's worth doing your due diligence as to who is working on your book. What kind of record do they have? What do they do? I would have a conversation. That would be me. Call them, ask them a ton of questions. Like, what do you do here? What do you do there? Talk to people so you can make sure that the person you gets you. You want to make sure they get you and that they're going to do the job for you that you expect them to do. And they don't, shy away from it. So you can do it and you can do it with confidence. You can absolutely do it with confidence if you get a book and it's done correctly and you're super happy with it. So that's my thing. But yeah, I've done it. I've done it for other people and we just put it out for another launch. And, it's a timeless message. You just do some tweaking. You're good to go. We'll do it again.
Nice. Yeah, I've got a handful of questions that I want us to end our interview on, but I want to ask you this though, too. So somebody's listening to this and they've had this kind of voice in the back of their head for a while. I should write a book. What would you say is the step-by-step process they should be aware of? Like if they were to reach out to you, for example, and say, how can you help me? What would you guide them on? And maybe you kind of spoke to it a little bit already there is like, well, we'd have to have a conversation of like, what's your intent? What's your why? But do you want to maybe speak through that? Like somebody comes to you fresh and they're saying, I got a book in me, but I don't know where to start. How do you guide them through that process so they understand where they're going and what the first step is?
Well, again, conversation's really good because that gives me an opportunity because everybody's book's going to be different. Their purpose is going to be different, everything. So I'm going to ask them, questions like, what kind of book? What are you looking for? What do you want to do with it? What's your motive? Here we are back to the why. Like, I want to know the why because that shapes me. How many pages are you looking at? What are you wanting to do? I heard one of my coaches tell this story that this woman wrote a book, and she wrote it, put all this effort in it, and she published it, but she never put it in the marketplace. She put out 2,000 copies and gave them away. And that author got multiple six-figure contracts for consulting and she never put it out in the marketplace. So that was her purpose. Her purpose was to increase her business. She didn't care about royalties or book sales. And so, let's have a conversation so we can know where we're going. And then I break it down as much as they won't. You can go too detailed at times, and it can be like, oh, stop.
Yeah.
I can't take this. So I have to back off. Okay, let's take baby steps. And then, we can work with them, or I have an online coaching class, and where they can learn how to write it. It's a step-by-step. Let's get the why. Let's get the strategy. Let's write your book. So I literally take them through that process. We can do coaching. We can do one-on-one. It's whatever they want to do. We've done a lot of books. I think together, my team and I we've done hundreds of books. So we've pretty much seen everything most stuff that can happen. And we know kind of how to address things. We've seen it before, been there, done that. So, we'll walk them through stuff. And then, we get them to that area where they are happy with their book. We're going to tell them it's very important for me, my team, is that they're very successful. We're kind of like the midwife, like we're helping birth that baby. And darn it, that's like our baby, so we're going to make sure that baby's healthy and strong and, going to make it and survive in this world. So we know we have a case study or two that we can share with them. They're like, hey, do it this way. Don't do it that way. And so we like to guide them to that successful point. And, if there's anything wrong, we're going to be honest. I mean, that's, to get in that bluntness and that transparency, that by the time you do get that book out, you're pretty excited about it. And that is what I would say, regardless if it's me or it's someone else, do your due diligence, have someone help you somehow, some way, so you can get it done right. A lot of times, there's some people, it's really amazing. Some people, man, they just sit down and write a book. They haven't had any training. Yeah. They haven't had any, they just write a book and like, holy cow, wow, you did a great job.
In a weekend,
there's some
kind of
people,
deal.
they just struggle. Yeah. And they just struggle. And so we'll pick you up wherever you're at. We're good. But do your due diligence, because there's a lot of people out there who can't, just like with any industry, you just got to find out what works for you, where you fit, where you're going to get along, and make sure when that book does come out and you got your name on it, you're super excited about it.
Yeah, you said an important piece there. I was actually meeting with a client the other day where I was explaining to him what I saw based on my own experience of like, okay, I know where you're at right now, and we can do this, and then we'll do that, and then we'll do this, and we'll do that, we'll do that. And he was like, whoa. And I was like, okay, let me reframe this. I was like, all right, let's do a visualization here really quickly. How about I see you on stages speaking to people where at the end of that presentation, there's people rushing up to the stage saying, I don't even know exactly what it is you do, but I need to work with you and I want to fly you out to LA and work with my team. And he was like, oh, I felt that. And I was like, oh, there it is right there, right? Like because some people want the details. They want to know the roadmap. They want to see how it works. Yes. Others, they just want to feel like you understand where they're trying to get to.
Exactly. And they don't want the in-between. Like if you're sending something over the fax machine, that's always baffling me. Like, how does that work? How does a fax machine work? But I don't really necessarily need to know the details. I just know that if I'm putting a document in the machine to you and I'm faxing it, I don't know, do they do faxes?
Somebody does, I'm sure. I'm sure it's the thing in the legal world still.
But so how does it get to you? Like, I really don't care. I just want to make sure it got to you, kind of a thing. And I think that's what you're explaining there. Like, I don't really care about that. Just get me there. I just want to make sure I get there that you're supposed to. And that's really, really a very good point on that. Too much information can be too much information.
100%. Yes. I've got a handful of questions that I always end off every interview with. There's like 6 or 7 of them, and I call it the power of one lightning round. Now, it doesn't mean you have to answer in like one word answers or anything like that. It's more just kind of a theme around the word one. And whatever comes up for you is the right answer. So, don't worry about whether it's a right or wrong. Are you good to go on that? Are you ready to?
I'm good.
All right.
Let's do it.
Okay. So first question is, who's one person or mentor that you believe has been the most influential in your life all time? So you can go back to childhood, whatever comes up for you.
Simple. My mother. My mother was the best mother, but she was a successful entrepreneur. And all through my life, she gave me these little nuggets. You know, the golden rule. Sherrie, do unto others as you want them to do unto you. Sherrie, if you're not going to do a job right, don't do it at all. You know, there is no such thing as luck. You know, you have to go out and create your luck. I mean, it was just constant little nuggets that she poured into me constantly. And also, you know, I did work for her and her entrepreneur stuff, and she taught me, you know, things, important aspects of entrepreneur stuff. So definitely my mother, my best friend, my mentor, and she was a fabulous person.
Beautiful. Love that answer. Very similar question, but slightly different. So who is one person or mentor that you believe is the most influential in your life right now? So somebody that's around you that you spend a lot of time with right now that has some impact, and not necessarily just on business, anything. Could be anything.
Could be anything. Oh, I have coaches, and they're really good, you know, impact in business. But my team has a tremendous impact on me. I go to them a lot of times. I bounce ideas off of them. I get their feedback because I really respect what they have to say. And other people that I work with, you know, I work with them because I value what they say. I value they've proven themselves trustworthy. They've proven themselves full of integrity and wise. And so I have these friends, and, you know, and it seems like certain friends, you know, they're really good in certain areas as well. So, you know, I'm really blessed with that.
That's great. I'm glad that you see that in everyday interactions, even the people that maybe work for you, that they can actually be mentors because they reflect back something in you, maybe that allows you to see something differently. It's a good answer. What is one philanthropic cause that means the most to you, and why? And if there's more than one, you can say that as well. But is there any one thing in particular? And I know you've written books on 2 topics in particular you've already mentioned here that are obviously very important. But is there anything that comes to mind?
Well, I have a heart for animals. So things that come up with that, I have a heart for that. But I'm involved with an organization called Life Renewal, and they are a counseling center. And they're there to counsel people who are struggling in mental health. And so that's one thing that, you know, it's one of my philanthropic causes. But, you know, animals and children, that usually has my heart right there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, we didn't really even dig into that book that you wrote, based on your experience in the foster system too. But I was going to mention, I have a friend who had kids through the foster system as well. I think they had like 5 or 6 kids, some of them as long as almost a year. And I just remember talking to him and thinking like, man, you guys have to be strong people to, you know, be a part of that and see that you're there to only be just a little blip in that person's life, but such a huge, huge part, because these kids were really young too, like less than a year old even. I just find that very admirable to try and even on the human trafficking side too. It's something that when you think about what we hear in the news nowadays, it's like, why don't we talk more about this stuff? You know, we're talking about all these other things that are fear-based, but yet there's these, and it's not like it's small numbers either. Like it's millions of people as well.
No, and kids. It's heart-wrenching.
Yeah.
It's absolutely heart-wrenching that what happens. And so I totally agree. I think that needs to be more of a conversation. It's not a pleasant conversation. I get that.
Yeah.
You know, but it is, there's a lot of conversations going on these days that aren't pleasant. stuff going on. But it is something that it needs to be talked about more.
Well, just talking about it here is another piece of that ripple that it'll bring awareness to it. So, and I'll make sure I link up all these things you're mentioning as well, so we can drive some attention to that as well.
Good.
All right. Next question. Good. What is one thing you are most grateful for right now? Whatever comes to mind.
I go back to the people around me. I think that I am, I've got to where I am. I've worked hard, but I think it's also my support system. Whether it be my team, whether it be my family, whether it be just, close friends, I'm just forever grateful for the people I have around me who pour into my life. You have to have people pour into your life. You don't, just pour into other people pour into yours. And it's kind of a give and take. So I'm going to say the people I surround myself with, I'm just blessed and grateful for that. Perfect.
What is one thing you are most curious about and looking to explore further? So maybe, anything in this world. Some people reference the financial world. Other people reference education system. What comes up for you? Is there anything you're kind of diving deep into?
Yeah. That's a good question. Mental health. I think there's a lot out there that people don't understand and isn't talked about. And I've actually been doing a lot of studying on it. And I want to write a book one day, like a really basic, easy to understand where people can go, oh my gosh, now that makes sense kind of a thing, And so I've been looking at different angles of mental health and I'm a licensed, I don't know if I mentioned I'm a licensed clinical Christian counselor. So I really have a, interest in that, but I want to write a book one day that makes it so basic that, a 12-year-old could pick it up and say, well, oh, now I understand this. That was not making sense. And I think when mental health doesn't make sense, it can be tormenting. It can be absolutely tormenting until you finally understand what's going on. It's like that, that enemy without a face. Now with, once you understand what's going on, now you know what you're facing, or whether it's you personally or through a loved one. I just think that's an important cause to bring out, especially now with all the stuff that's been going on, especially.
Oh, yeah. 100%. I know in the last 6 months, it's been one of the things that's really had me step back from everything and go, okay, wait a second. I need to be a part of the change here. How can I do that? And naturally, I ended up landing on, take care of myself first and implement these intentions and behaviors and habits that do serve me and allow me to have the best possible mindset and physical body and everything else. And then also I'm a dad of 2 young boys, and, same thing with kids. It's like, what can I do to impact these kids without pushing values onto them, but just to have them be kind, curious, brave, young kids and able to self-regulate. And my neighbor just actually bought me a book the other day for the kids that he uses for his own. And it's a book about breathing, and it just uses kids stories. So they'll talk about a candle. Okay, we're going to do the candle exercise now, right? So hold your candle up, and it gets the kids breathing. But I know that it's actually teaching them self-regulation too. And it's just so amazing. There needs to be more of that. I completely agree. I'm glad that you said that, because we all need to be sharing these little things that can just help a person feel normal and safe.
Yeah. And that they're not alone.
And that
people think no one will understand me. Nobody would understand what I'm going through, or, that's why it's just really a book of answers, really just a book of answers and explanations why, and this is why, to help people self-regulate, to help them, make sense out of stuff that is really weird now, especially now.
A lot of information coming at us. It's certainly an amazing time and a possibly very scary time. And
it is.
That leads me to the last question I have for you, which is, What is the one thing that scares you right now that you know you need to meet with bravery? Is there anything that comes to mind?
I think I'm going to kind of piggyback off of what we've been talking about. I think what's going on in the world is pretty darn scary. And it would be easy to pull the covers over our head and say, that's it, I'm not dealing with it. Today, I'm not dealing with it. But that's not going to help anything. And at the very least, get out of bed. As my mom would say, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and go forward. So I think that is something that's scary, but there are times when you have to face it with bravery. And you don't know, none of us knows what's coming next. None of us knows what's around the corner. None of us know this. But you know what? We're not facing it alone. I'm facing it with you, and you're facing it with the person you had on earlier, and she's facing, we're not facing it alone. And there's safety in numbers, and there's power in numbers. And we've got to keep that mindset.
Yep. Find your community, find your tribe. Be very consciously
Absolutely.
aware of the information you're consuming. Be very consciously aware of the language you use in speaking to yourself and out into the world. Like, all of these things are a piece of
Absolutely.
Support in a sometimes scary world, for sure.
Yes. Nowadays, it's a very scary world.
Yeah.
Nowadays is. So,
Well,
we just don't know what to expect.
Yeah. Well, I just want to acknowledge you for the work that you're doing, though, and the fact that you have this passion around helping people share their stories, because it's a piece of, we've referenced it a few times here, that book that you have inside of you, that story that you have to tell, if it helps one person, you're literally a part of the impact that you want to create in this world. And I say this to myself and to people that I work with and friends and family all the time, that, it's that butterfly effect. Every action that you take every single day, especially if it's as impactful as writing that book, can have such a hugely profound impact on the world. And you might never see it, but by you holding back on your gifts and your story, you're actually robbing other people of potentially that breakthrough. That's, positive message that needs to come through, or that, oh, I'm not alone moment. So I just want to acknowledge you for the work that you do, because I think it's incredibly important. And there's a lot of people that'll listen to this and go, maybe it's time. So on that note, how do people reach out and connect with you, find out more, all of that fun stuff, so they could get in touch?
Yeah, I would love for them to reach out to me. Website is www.storehousemediagroup.com. So that's store, like I'm going to the store, STORE, house, HOUSE, mediagroup.com. And you can kind of take a gander around, look and see what's going on. There's a form. You can reach out and contact us. I also find me on LinkedIn, and, Sherrie Clark. And I actually, if they want a free download called How Great Leaders Write Their Story in a Book and Leave a Legacy, they can go to writebook.sherrieclark.com, which is WRITEBOOK.SherrieClark, SHERRIECLARK.com. And they'll go there and they can get a free download. And they can also, there'll be other opportunities, to learn more about how to write that book and how to get that, book out. So, there's a lot of different ways that they can reach. But, for those aspiring writers out there, I wish you all the best success. You tell your story, tell your story. Don't take that. My mom had a story to tell, and she never got around to sharing it. And, she ended up dying, and I never got to read her story. So do not take that story to the graveyard with you.
Yes.
Share it. People will get something out of it. It will resonate.
It's a good message, and obviously one that we've hammered home a few times, which is find your mentor, find your coach, find somebody that's been where you want to get to, and trust.
Yes.
And trust, and then just lean into just the hardest and the most fulfilling work, which is to just get that story out, right? All the other pieces, somebody's done that before. It's really quite simple, right? Like at the end of the day, you'd probably even say that too. Like, you know what? Like getting the book published and out into the world, it's really quite easy. We have a formula for that. The challenge is always having somebody step up bravely and say, it's time. So
Absolutely.
Yeah. So if somebody's
well said.
Yeah. So if somebody's listening and they're like, okay, it's time, reach out, please. And I'll make sure to link all those things up in the show notes as well. So Sherrie, thank you so much for doing this. I greatly appreciate it. I enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you, Trevor. I enjoyed it immensely too.
All right. Take care. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of The Trevor Turnbull Show. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, please consider subscribing on my YouTube channel and on your favorite podcast platform and leave me a review. I'd love to hear from you. Now, until next time, remember, today is a beautiful day of opportunity. Trust that you're exactly where you're supposed to be right now. So be grateful, be curious, and be brave.